Based upon the title of this essay, I get the feeling it's going to get a lot of attention. Chances are many people are going to jump right into this video without watching the previous 7 videos in the series. So, let me start by saying, welcome! This is a series dedicated to teaching people how to become developers. Now, you don't know that because this is the first video that you're watching. So please go watch the previous 7 videos in proper order. Okay? All right. Now, for the rest of you who have been following along, this topic might seem like jumping the gun a bit, but bear with me, okay? I know what you're thinking. Giving you advice on how to handle a job interview before I've even taught you any programming skills, that's a little premature.
Shut your mouth.
I'm sorry? What did you just say?
You're just coming off stupid.
I'm coming off as stupid. You're wearing tuxedos to a job that requires you to clean bathrooms. Please leave this office. We're done with this interview.
Do we get any sort of souvenir?
Get out of my office!
But I want to go over this first because I want you to understand what you're up against before you even get started. Aha! Makes a lot more sense now, doesn't it? Okay, so here is what you can expect. So over the years, interviewing for internet jobs has changed quite dramatically. I did my first developer interview in 1998, and I did my most recent one a few weeks ago. I've never worked at one web development position longer than 7 years, so I've seen a lot of silly interview trends and fads come and go. So when you're going on an interview in the 1990s and the early 2000s, it was like any traditional job. The human resources department of a company would post a job opening, you would send in your resume, and they would call you to schedule an interview. You would go into their office, talk to your potential boss, and you'd get a call back with a job offer or a polite email declining to hire you. So about 7 years later, around 2005 or so, that began to change. Instead of using their internal HR department to hire people, companies began to pay third-party agencies to screen candidates. Often, you'd be asked to come into the agency office and take some kind of technical skills test so they could rate your abilities. Then, you would frequently have to take another skills test when you went on the interview with the company that was going to hire you. That was my experience with Disney. On my very first Disney interview, I was given an online skills test. Now, no one said whether or not I was allowed to use the internet. And I wasn't about to ask, so I used the internet to look up all the answers. And after I was hired, the senior developers at Disney confessed that was exactly what they wanted me to do. They made up questions that were deliberately difficult, but easy to research, because Disney wanted to hire developers who took the initiative to find the knowledge and look up the solutions online. You see, real developers are not expected to have everything memorized, but you should be smart enough to investigate an answer. So these days, things have changed yet again. Today, there are a ton of different ways companies will hire you. Some companies still hire directly through their HR department. Most companies are still outsourcing their hiring to agencies. Most agencies don't give technical skills tests anymore, but some still do. Often, most agencies will simply send your resume to a potential employer. If that employer likes your skills, they'll do a telephone interview and ask you a bunch of technical questions. If they like you based upon that, they will have you come into the office for an in-person interview. Now, sometimes they'll ask you to take an online skills test before they have you come into the office. Sometimes they'll request that you actually build a web page for them based upon certain parameters, and if they like your work, they'll invite you into the office. Now, I've been in the position to hire new employees multiple times in my career. And there are 3 common practices that many hiring managers do these days that I will never do and I have never done. Number 1, whiteboard tests. Number 2, paper questionnaires. And number 3, verbal quizzes over the phone or face-to-face. Now, in a whiteboard test, which I really hate, they ask you to write code on a whiteboard. Now, personally, I've never tested anyone that way because I never expect any developer to memorize code. I mean, look at it this way. You might memorize a favorite passage from a novel or a poem because the value in those words is the idea, the emotion, the inspiration of that text. But computer code has no value whatsoever outside of a computer system. Computer languages don't have any function. They don't perform any tasks unless they're written in the computer itself. So as long as computers exist, we will always be able to look up the code on the computer. There is never a valid reason for you to waste your time memorizing code. The computer has a memory, so we don't need to waste space in ours. It's like that line Sean Connery has in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I wrote my diary so I wouldn't have to remember.
He who finds the Grail must face the final challenge.
What final challenge?
3 devices of such lethal cunning.
Booby traps?
Oh, yes. But I found the clues that will safely take us through in the Chronicles of St. Anselm.
Well, what are they?
Can't you remember? I wrote them down in my diary so that I wouldn't have to remember.
Well, you write code in your computer so you don't have to remember. Asking people to write code from memory on a whiteboard is senseless. I mean, look, if you want to hire a musician, you listen to their music. You don't ask them to write down a song, right? If you hire a photographer, you look at their photos. You don't ask them to draw a picture. If you want to hire a chef, you eat their food. You don't ask them to publish their recipes. If you want to hire a race car driver, you watch them drive. You don't ask them to sketch a map of a racetrack. If you want to experience your favorite novel, do you pull out a notebook and start writing it down from memory? No, you go to the bookshelf and you read it. It's all written down for you already. Writing website code on a whiteboard is just as pointless as rewriting a novel from memory. Just go look up the code in the computer. Memorizing code is useless. Fill your memory with useful things, like your girlfriend's phone number, your mother's birthday, the tender feel of a horse's muzzle in your hand. And speaking of muzzles, memorize the smell of gunpowder on a cool morning breeze. Now, paper questionnaires are exactly the same. I will never hand a candidate a test with coding problems on paper. Why? Because that is just a smaller version of a whiteboard. It doesn't tell me anything about their competence as a developer. I graduated a long time ago from grade school. I don't expect anyone to test me, and I won't insult others by treating them that way. And finally, verbal quizzes over the phone, another common practice that I will never do. I've never given a verbal quiz to anyone, and I do not test potential candidates on their coding abilities. That is rude and insulting. If your portfolio contains samples of your code, and I have read about your skills on your resume, I know you are qualified for the job. Why quiz a person with technical questions? The only motive to ask technical questions is if I suspected that a person was lying about their ability. And I don't do that. I don't assume people are liars. I have faith in people. I assume their resume is honest and they're telling the truth, plain and simple. You know what else I've always done? Anytime I've been in charge of hiring someone, I personally call every single candidate who came in for an interview, and I have the courtesy and respect to tell them the position had been filled. I never leave anyone hanging. But that's just the way that I like to treat people. Not everyone shares my philosophy. Now, personally, with the exception of Disney, I've gotten all of my jobs the old-fashioned way. No outside agencies, no tests, no quizzes. I send my resume to a company. The HR department calls me to schedule an interview. I go to the office. I meet with my potential boss, we have a conversation for 30 minutes to an hour, and I get offered a job on the spot, or through a phone call in a few days. And if I'm not offered a job on the spot, I send them a thank you note when I get home to let them know I appreciate the opportunity to meet with them. That is the way it should be done. That is honorable, that is respectful, and that's been the American way for generations, and I don't see any reason to change it. Trust people to be honest, treat them with respect, let them know you value their time. And in keeping with that sentiment, I value your time for watching this video. Thanks for indulging me. And remember, kids, the world owes you nothing until you create things of value.